Good morning. Let me try that again. Good morning. There we are. Thank you very, very much. I want to start off with 3 quotes that I always start off with in doing presentations because I think it's a good way of grounding us in what you will then hear. First is, you should assume also almost axiomatically that the foundation of what we're doing is about data and AI. The second thing you should work with as an assumption is that every budget is an AI budget. Stop thinking that the IT budget is the only place in which you actually have money. Every budget is an IT budget. Doesn't necessarily AI budget. That doesn't mean you necessarily spend all of the budget on AI, but it is a possibility. And the third thing is every human decision will at minimum be AI supported. Those are almost axiomatic statements for what we're going into. But one thing I always think is important when we start to talk about what are we then going to do is to understand what is your North Star in everything we talk about. Where are you going? As an organization, but for that matter of fact, also as an individual. And so we need to ask ourselves, this digital North Star, where is that in 20 years? And you want it to be a real star, you don't want it to be the Death Star. So therefore, it is important for us to summarize where is it we are moving with all of this. And I think that can be done in one slide. Now, every time you try to do something in one slide, you end up with a situation in which most people will say, well, that's pretty obvious, and I get that. But if I summarize what the world is like today, it is essentially something that consists of 3 things. It is us as human beings. It is the products and services that human beings create that we use, everything around us, buildings and what have you. And third, it is the processes that define organizational structures, whether that is the company you work for, the country you're in, or your family structure. Every structure has a set of processes. Our North Star is essentially to digitalize all of this. And in the center of that North Star is artificial intelligence as the vehicle and engine together with data that allows us to realize this. Now, there are 5 things that must be in place to realize this over the course of the next 20 years. First is that we actually have the compute infrastructure that enables us to actually execute this. And that we know is not in place yet. That we also know we have not solved some of the fundamental issues of that compute infrastructure, such as, for example, do we produce enough electricity to actually power this? The second thing is we need ubiquitous security. We need to make sure that we can live in a post-quantum security world. Third is we need a financial technology infrastructure that allows this, and cloud is partially an element of that allows us to effectively deliver this in an economic manner. Fourth is that we need to all become software developers. And last but not least, we need to have unlimited bandwidth to execute this all the way out to the farthest part of the nodes that make up the architecture. This is your North Star. And when people then talk about sub-elements of AI agents or what you can do with sophisticated GPUs, keep in mind those are only building blocks for what we are trying to do, which is to produce this world. And this world has a number of descriptors for it, and each of these 3 leaves have descriptors. For example, under products. It is clear that what will happen with all products is they will become autonomous. We've spent now the last 10 years discussing a world of autonomous vehicles. It's still not there. Elon Musk. But it will eventually get there, and every product will become autonomous. Every product will have a digital twin that allows us to emulate it, try it out before we buy it, execute things that are changes before, in fact, it is built into manufacturing processes. And third, we will know what the products consist of, which means that we can actually finally realize an economy that uses the scarce resources on Earth in a circular manner. The second leaf is that of processes. The processes will become autonomous. This is, in essence, what you are building now with agent-based technology, is you are having the agents execute things in processes so that we don't need to be involved. That means the organizational structure will become reconfigurable, so we will be able to reconfigure things based on what makes most economic sense, human sense, and perhaps also ethical sense in terms of how we build things. And third, governance in the process becomes probably one of the key aspects that will evolve over the next couple of years, because you cannot today be building AI agents without building governance into the agent from the beginning. Make that perfectly clear. Don't buy anything that hasn't got governance as a simple aspect of feature in the products that you buy today, because we need to be able to scale this to the entire enterprise, which will mean, and you will see this later, is that governance becomes a key leadership skill set that will differentiate great leaders from mediocre leaders. And then us. There will be many versions of you. There will be autonomous versions of you that will use your credit cards, and in some instances, if it is based on hallucinating models, it will use your credit card even though you don't want to. The bottom line here is every aspect of us will be replicated in a digital version of us. There will be hundreds of them. There will be the work versions of you. There will be the home versions of you. There will be the sport versions of you. There will be the family versions of you. And they will act autonomously, and they will have sensing capability. They will know emotions to a degree that allow them to do things that you perhaps want them to do. That is the world we live in. Now I have a test for you. There's one word that appeared on every one of the last 3 slides. What is that word? Autonomous. Because in essence, the North Star is building an autonomous world. It is a world that can execute on the basis of using technology, but for which we are central in that world. And that is your North Star. Now, let's then go to the present and say, okay, how does the world look today? First thing is, many surveys would suggest that we as leaders or as individuals really are not ready for this change. Only 23% of us actually have the necessary data, AI, governance skills to succeed in what is being demanded in your role over the next couple of years. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what are the key technologies right now that will enable us to become an AI-driven enterprise. And I believe that there are 6 of them that we should at least focus on. Maybe not necessarily in equal effort in your organization, but they are the building blocks that allow you to achieve that North Star. Now, the first of them is tokenization. This is essentially that if all of the world is autonomous and machines become customers of machines, and we interact with machines that are there from a behalf of another individual or another organization, then we need some kind of infrastructure to enable payment. And that infrastructure is not there today. The technologies are certainly there in the blockchain environments, in the Web3 definition-based environments, in what you have in terms of the crypto-based environments, but it's not really built into the infrastructure and fabric that allows all of us to feel secure, and that is one thing that we need to build. The second thing is the existing compute architectures that are now the ones that run your organization, or for us as individuals that run what we do, they're not sufficient. So we are going to enter into a world in which we will start to mix compute architectures. We're not going to see suddenly all of GPUs disappear and then us implementing a quantum-based architecture. These will intermix over time, and so we need to be prepared to sort of build for that environment of mixed compute architectures. Third is that a lot of this, because we act in the virtual world, will require us to use technologies such as AR and VR-based technologies incorporating artificial intelligence that will allow us to do many, many things much more effectively than we do today. It will certainly improve efficiency across organizations as we deploy this. It will, in very dangerous environments, reduce risk because we can, in fact, interact with a real environment in a virtual world and thereby learn how it operates before we unleash ourselves in the real world. Lastly, or fourthly here in this, is that we enter a world in which robots will dominate in many environments. For those of you that have logistic-based environments, you will likely find that by 2030, in sophisticated warehousing environments or in sophisticated logistics environments, the number of robots will outnumber frontline workers. And for those of you that follow international news, you will actually have seen that there was a report leaked from Amazon 2 days ago that suggested that Amazon expected over the next 5 years to have 90% of all warehousing work done by robots. Then we need to ensure that we can build the right architectures to enable this, and I will talk about this later, so we'll skip this. And the last point that I made earlier is this aspect of governance has to be built in as a management skill set. Technology governance is something that we need to appreciate is highly complex. For example, the survey that suggested that there are many companies that have 10 projects running, how do they know what those different models are doing at any given time? Is there a central command center that ensures this? Are the leaders trained in terms of understanding how to operate this? No, they're not. So we need governance as a part of a key skill set. What is clear is now that we will see a slow creep of agentic AI into the overall architectures of the organization. And some people will suggest that by 2030, there will be over 30% of enterprise software processes that will contain AI agents. That could be ambitious, but there's no doubt that this is a process, not necessarily something that happens next year. It is a longer-term process, and for those of you that have lived through SAP implementations or large-scale Oracle implementations, you know this just doesn't happen immediately, especially because we are talking about things like task decomposition. We have to actually figure out how tasks operate between each other. We need to understand how can we implement multimodal reasoning inside our organization to a degree that we trust it. And of course, we need to figure out how do we actually deploy the protocols that allow us to manage combinations of agents and agents of agents. This is not a simple task. So I know Sam Altman is super enthusiastic about this. I know Satya Nadella is super enthusiastic about this. But they have vested interest in it because they want to sell it to you. Just keep in mind, this is a classical problem of technology adoption, something that has nothing to do with the technology and all to do with management practices, culture, budget, people, talent, and organizational structures. Now, most are therefore not ready for what we're talking about. And so one thing, actually, and I want to therefore focus on 3 things that I think are important. And the first one here, I hate saying this, but I mean, sometimes you have to admit the situation. I'm old. I know, but I'm not in brain and heart. I feel very young, but I know I'm old now because what I'm going to tell you will date me. So I have, I grew up as an analyst in Gartner in the 1980s. And for those of you that remember the 1980s and worked with PCs back then, because that was the cool thing to work with, nowadays nobody cares about them. But when you worked with PCs back then, there's a number of fundamental issues with PCs. One of them was that hard disks could only store like 40 megabytes or 20 megabytes, the first PCs, 20 megabytes of data, right? That was not a lot. And I don't know if you understand, but some of you will, the technical aspects of hard disks is you store data on it, and so it stores it on a series of tracks, but it then also leaves a couple of holes in it, right? And those holes don't get filled out with the next data set because there isn't space for it. So you have this hard disk where, in fact, if you add up all the holes, you have half the hard disks that's still possible to be used theoretically. Somebody came up with a piece of software called defragging software, which basically means you rearrange the bits on a hard disk and you got more space. Most of you are now sitting there thinking, what the heck does that have to do with AI? Fair enough. However, what is happening in most organizations today is that we are deploying tools that are AI-enabled tools, could be Copilot, could be ChatGPT, could be a lot of different products that you use, and we gain productivity of the individual. What does the person do? They may spend a little extra time on TikTok. They may do extra work, or they may call their family because they've just saved 20 minutes of time by using an efficient tool. Meaning, we're not actually taking that saved time and figuring out how do we rearrange jobs and how do we rearrange business processes in a way that allows us to actually be successful with this deployment. We're doing the classical problem of taking technology and deploying it on top of the existing when we know that the existing has to change before we actually deploy the tools. And so I would strongly recommend that where you start after you've ensured that you have the right data architectures in your organization is you really don't start with looking at the technology, but start looking at your business processes and how you might be able to re-engineer those business processes so that you can unleash the productivity benefits that are claimed by the tools. Think about that. The processes need to be adapted to this because this is something that changes things fundamentally in our organization. And you don't deploy the technology and then change processes. You at least think about doing this in parallel. So that's the first thing that I think is really important for us to start to think about now. The second thing, and Halil mentioned this also, is that where we probably have seen the biggest tangible benefit with artificial intelligence now, in 2025, has been in tools that are AI-enabled for the software development lifecycle. Basically, tools that help software developers. And so, what is happening right now, and I don't think we are focused enough on this, is the economics of AI software development is becoming an unbelievable potential if we actually deploy this correctly. And so, I'm maybe sick, but I think a lot about this. I know it's sad that you should think about other things, but I do. And so I thought there has to be a formula for this. And I think there is. And the formula would be one that says, let's take the number of developers. It could be the number of developers in Turkey, software developers. Nobody in this room knows how many there are, so I'm going to make up a number. 150,000 software developers in Turkey. It could be 200,000, but let's just use 150,000. So that's the number of developers. Secondly is the economic contribution of software developers today without AI tools. And there are surveys out there that suggest that the annual economic contribution of a software developer is $100,000. Okay? Then we take and deploy the software tools using artificial intelligence-enabled software development tools, and that has an annual productivity benefit increase to the software developer. Let's just assume that 3 years from now it's 100%. In that case, I now have 150,000 software developers in Turkey. I have $100,000 of development that I now get 100% of because I'm increasing the software developer's productivity from $100,000 to $200,000. So I'm gaining an extra $100,000. That's 15 billion US dollars to the Turkish economy annually. Now, we may say, oh, that's great for Turkey, but what about my business? Well, you could take the same formula and look at your business and then say, okay, if this plays out correctly, I could actually do a significantly interesting business case that will allow me to demonstrate that there's economic contribution to my business. Certainly what I think this shows is the organizations that are saying if the tools improve the productivity by 100%, I should get rid of 50% of my software developers. That, I would argue, is by far the worst strategy that you could implement. So the economic value of what is happening now is very difficult to measure, but certainly could potentially be very potential. The third thing is that we can't trust anything. I can't trust that what you're saying to me is you. I can't trust the visual image of you on a computer. I can't trust your organization. In fact, we can't trust anything today. And we all know that politicians of whatever sort is making sure we can't. So we live in a world without trust. And we have to adapt to that. So the question is, what do we do? I think this has to do with rediscovering something that is truly human, which is the ability to trust wisely. And I believe organizations need to make trust something that is important and something that we track. You track customer satisfaction, right? You know that your customers are satisfied, but that doesn't mean they trust you. And in the world we go into where there is no trust, you need to measure the trust that exists in your organization, and perhaps we should start to actually have a trust index, knowing that this brand can be trusted, not just because of what they historically have done, but what they, on a go-forward basis, choose to do with artificial intelligence. And I think this poses a number of fundamental leadership questions in terms of what does that mean for us? Because trust doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing for everybody. But what we do know is that human in the loop, the leader in the loop, is certainly about creating human trust in the systems and the processes that we are using. But all this being said, the ability to do this rests on a number of very few things. There are 6 that will become the definers of whether this will be successful. And I mentioned some of them earlier, but here they are in one slide. Because the challenges of AI is not whether or not you adopt an MCP protocol. It is not whether or not you have the right settings in your parameters in your individual model. It is not whether or not you have machine learning capability in your organization. It is these 6 things. Is one, where does the money come from to do all of this? Where do you get the talent, and how do you develop the talent in your organization to be able to absorb this, both as the valuable workers that exist in the entire organization, and for that matter of fact, also, therefore, the people that are the leaders in the organization? Third is, if you don't have the right data architecture, the right set of data governance principles, the leadership capabilities to understand what data architectures and governance actually is, you won't succeed with any of this. Fourth is the risk aspect of things. If trust is not there, how are you managing this risk? Fifth is, how do you calculate the payback of this? And last but not least, organizational structures will change as a result of this. So are you able to absorb this change in your organization, which has to do with everything Halil talked about, namely culture? Is the right culture in place to absorb this level of innovation, this level of economic change, this level of human change that exists in your company? I will therefore leave you with 3 things. You have to define your North Star. And you have to be crystal clear in your organization that everybody has the same definition. They need to talk about the same thing, because you will not succeed if you don't use a common language for what that North Star is. Second, AI changes the economics of what we do. This is probably the first technology that has significant impact on the economics of your business model. And third, this is about people. And just giving people Copilot or allowing them to do ChatGPT does not make them ready for this. This is a continuous process of upskilling that we will need to go through as a human race over the course of the next 20 years. With that, may the AI force be with you in whatever you do. Thank you.